Food is love, but sometimes food may come with its own share of spice bumps. And in a country like India, that can be in many shades. And when you combine business with food, the cocktail is mostly heady, but sometimes a tightrope walk. The beautiful Indian food diversity and the Indian food divide are not as black and white in reality. Zomato has rolled back a policy it rolled out. All this in less than, say, 15 to 16 hours. But the context to all of this offers important insights into where India is. We try and understand what Zomato did and why the rollback happened. The wordings of its CEO are hugely important at every instance, and that's the prism we look into today, to also look into today's India. But before that, Deepinder Goyal, it would have been the best to discuss this with you. If you do agree, my team and I have our invite extended to you. Now, what did Zomato do? On Tuesday evening, Deepinder Goyal announced a dedicated pure veg fleet. They called it Pure Veg Mode. And what was that? They said it was a curation of restaurants that serve only pure vegetarian food and will exclude all restaurants that will serve any non-veg food. They said it was a dietary provision and doesn't serve any religious or political preference. This one last line in itself shows possible challenges that the could possibly eclipse this decision. But that was just one part. And then, as I said, in less than 14 to 16 hours, Zomato rolls back this proposal. And the wordings are very important. They decide to remove on-ground segregation. Hold it there. They don't remove the on-ground segregation. They remove the on-ground segregation based on color code. So code green is done away with. And all their delivery personnel will wear the color red. But the pure veg segregation isn't stopped. It will be visible to the customer on the app, but not the Aam Janta. And why? Deepinder says this is to ensure the delivery partners are not incorrectly associated with non-vegetarian food or blocked by residential welfare associations or societies during special days. Or, in fact, he goes on to say that our riders and their physical safety is of paramount importance. We also realize some of our customers could get into trouble. And thanks to people for helping us understand the unintended consequences of the action. Now, isn't this a huge reflection on where India is? Or is it? And here's where choice, caste, religion, diversity, divide all have very close associations. Now let's look at some facts. According to World Atlas, India has the highest number of vegetarians, with 38% of its total population being vegetarians. If we look at the NFHS 5 data, only 23% of women and 15% of men never consume chicken, fish or meat. Now when you look at the north, it's far more prominent in the north when compared to the south. Punjab, Haryana, Himachal, Uttarakhand, J&K, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh. More than 50% women never consume meat here and at least 33% of men. West, particularly Gujarat, has high prevalence of vegetarianism. It's way different, much less down south in the east as well. If you look at, in fact, the top states, Haryana, Rajasthan, Punjab and Gujarat are the states with the highest rates of vegetarianism. But also an interesting data that's come out just recently. This is a study that's been conducted by the Indian Council of Agricultural Research. Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, Government of India and World Fish recently also found a staggering 72.1% of the Indian population, equivalent to around 966.9 million individuals, incorporated fish in some form into their diet. But as I said, this isn't about vegetarianism versus non-vegetarianism. India has never been about that, but about choice. about freedom. Many claim caste, others about perceived threats, growing businesses, and a mushrooming democracy. I'm being joined right now by Sanjay Jha, who's an author, Subhash Jha, who's an advocate, Pradeep Rawat, who's an ex-RWA president, India Bulls Centrum Park in Gurgaon, and Lloyd Matthias, business strategist. Thank you very much, all four of you, for joining us. So my first question to you, Sanjay Jha, the vegetarian food segregation stays. The color code is done away with. That's an important segregation. How do you view that?
Sneha, good evening to you and to my fellow panelists. I'm glad you're discussing this subject, and I wish, frankly, the Zomato CEO, who has been very active on Twitter, had actually come on the program. There are a couple of points that we need to really factor in. One, let me start by being first positive about the fact that at least he demonstrated some degree of reasonableness by saying that he would be changing the color. There would be no color distinctions, which frankly was very atrocious and absurd. And by saying that if he got negative feedback, he would actually restore the vegetarian and the non-vegetarian segregation that Zomato is practicing. But, the problem that fundamentally, I think Zomato may have missed the woods for the trees is this country is very polarized and divided on multiple things already. And since I'm part of politics, I can tell you the last thing on earth we need, which has already been happening, as you all know, with beef bans and what you can eat and you can't. In Gujarat, for that matter, there are many vendors who were told you can't have non-vegetarian food near X places of temples or periods of worship. These are all policies of discrimination, because I don't think the fundamental rights of this country deny anybody an opportunity to practice what they believe is free trade. What is worrying is that what Zomato frankly wished to do would have been, in my opinion, aggravating or accentuating the politics of polarization in this country. We are basically going to make it retail. I just can't imagine. I live in Mumbai. I'm actually, a non-resident Bihari. I've lived in Mumbai for over 30 years. And I know there are places, actually, not too far away from where I live, there are not non-vegetarian restaurants at all. And this is very close to one of the poshest residential areas of India called Malabar Hill, where there's a majority of people who are actually, people who prefer vegetarian food. It doesn't mean there are people there who are not meat lovers. But the truth is that there is a clear, if it's not very palpable, there is an imperceptible, shall we say, fiat that non-vegetarians or meat eaters are not really celebrated. Zomato, I think, was only adding fuel to that kind of a very unwarranted fire of division between people, saying that, listen, if you're vegetarian, then I don't want a non-vegetarian to live in my society or even be seen very close to my precincts. And my second point of worry here, Sneha, is that a Swiggy or a Zomato should realize that they are providing, I don't know the last updated data, but from the last I read, or at least till a few years ago, they were providing over 1.5 million deliveries a day. That means you're feeding close to maybe together around 4 million a day on a regular basis aggregated together. So they have a responsibility, not just in terms of, the delivery people, made to wear different colors, and to that extent, encouraging the perception that this is vegetarian and this is not. But I think the larger problem being that you are allowing a debate to happen, a division to happen on a matter that doesn't deserve to be treated that way. And I'll tell you, Sneha, the irony. There is this whole perception being created in the last couple of years, maybe longer, that we are a very vegetarian country. And that is a complete hogwash. I mean, you look at the data, they will tell you, and this is official data, 80% of people in India are non-vegetarian, or I would call them as meat eaters. The truth is people do,
in fact, Sanjay,
eat meat.
if you could just hold that thought, because we need to revisit that thought.
Yeah.
let me just also get the introductory remarks from others as well. Subhash Jha, if I can come to you. Now, Deepinder brought in an aspect saying that this was part of a dietary rollout, in the sense that there were those who consumed, who were pure vegetarians, and they had issues or they had received feedback saying that there's spillover or there's smell or whatever, those are the reasons he gave with when food is brought in together. And he said Zomato is now going to start a fleet that's going to be taking the pure vegetarian food totally different. Now, many have criticized this at several levels. The rollback has, of course, happened. The segregation still remains. Now, how do you view this in terms of a business trying to provide what could be a requirement for the clientele vis-a-vis the larger caste dynamics around this that may manifest in the society as well, in terms of either welcoming it or criticizing it?
Sneha, let me tell you at the very outset that you have not been as audible as you should have been. But what I comprehend, what I understand,
okay,
and I'll try to answer to that. I think that this controversy is absolutely unnecessary, unwarranted, and uncalled for. Where is the controversy? Your own report shows, I think Mr. Sanjay Jha is not correct when he says that about 20% are only vegetarian. Your own report shows just now is about 38% Indians are vegetarians. So, but nevertheless, a large number, it's a matter of fact that a large number of Indian population are vegetarian, and they would certainly not like that the veg food and non-veg food should be mixed in the same carrier or same package. So therefore, possibly taking into consideration the demand possibly of a large number of vegetarians who must have insisted that there has to be segregation, let the food be not served in the same container in which non-vegetarian foods are served. And therefore, Zomato, as a matter of business policy, decides to segregate these foods and then how do you do it? So they have decided that let us have a separate dress code also as well, apart from having a separate container. And I see absolutely nothing wrong. I'm sure Mr. Jha has lived abroad for quite some time and must have been traveling quite often. You go to any foreign country, you will find there are 3 containers which segregates each of the type of garbage which are required to be thrown in. Say, for example, for plastic bottles, there is a separate container, separate color. There is a waste paper, if it is a separate container, separate color. I mean, if you must have seen there is one box having 3 different containers of 3 different colors.
You have that kind of segregation in India as well
at
for
all
the waste,
any
though.
issue. This is a matter of business policy.
Sneha, I want to respond
and when we
to Mr.
talk of
Jha.
sentiments, it is sentiments of also those who are vegetarians. Absolutely, we are purely vegetarians. There is absolutely nothing wrong in having such type of policy. And to see this with the prism of religion or political overtones, in my assessment, is an absolutely flawed idea.
I want to respond.
Okay.
Sneha,
all right.
Sneha, I need to respond to this quickly.
Sanjay, do you want to go in right now? Or okay, all right, okay. You have the right to respond very quickly, please. I have to go to others.
I'll keep my answer short. I think Mr. Jha still needs to look at his figures correctly. I'm, by the way, Mr. Jha, quoting you official figures. These are figures based on the family health survey done by the government of India. These are surveys done by health experts. And the data is absolutely crystal clear that 80%, if not more, are people who eat meat. You are actually probably doing selective cherry picking. And you can't live in a fool's paradise. Let's not be delusional. India has seen deaths and violence on account of beef consumption. I, by the way, live in Mumbai. I don't have to live abroad to tell you this, that in Mumbai, there are many people belonging to a minority community who are meat eaters who are not allowed to stay in a particular place. Even a very popular Bollywood actor who belongs to a minority community.
Allow me to just go to Pradeep Rawat for that. Sanjay, let me go to Pradeep Rawat at this point. He's an ex-RWA president as well. Pradeep, as you saw what unfolded with Zomato, I have to ask you this as well. What's the reality with the RWA associations across the country that struck you? You know, when you look at the response of why Deepinder Goyal said he was rolling it back, two things. He spoke about the safety of his delivery personnel and he spoke about the safety of his customers. And he brought in the fact about how some RWAs may go ahead and block or target. And then you have to look at how Sanjay Jha, as well as several news reports in the past, have spoken about how people of a particular community or people who eat a particular kind of food are not allowed, they don't even find place to stay. Very much in minority if you look at the larger part of India, larger context, but still a very prevalent concern that has emerged and has quite frankly been officially voiced in a way by Deepinder. How do you look at this?
Thank you, Sneha, for inviting me to the show.
Pradeep Rawat.
To be very frank, I just had heard the conversation from the previous two panelists. Yeah, from the previous two panelists, whatever they said, somehow some points are correct, some points are not. As a common citizen of this country, I would say, how do we divide people on the basis of food eating habits? I'll give you a simple example. In my family itself, I'm a pure vegetarian. I don't eat anything that is non-veg, but my children take eggs. So you can call them vegetarians. But my wife sometimes take meat as well. So in case I want to order from Zomato, what do? How do I divide my family? So my simple and very clear answer is, let's not talk about how and what to order and what order is correct. The best thing is let people decide what they want. Secondly, in many parts of the country, yes, I have heard that some RWAs are insisting on that there should be a different segregation for non-veg deliveries or veg deliveries. But what I feel is citizens have the right. We are a vast country with different kind of culture, and we all believe that food habits are entirely the domain of the person or the family, what they want to eat and what they don't want to eat. So we should not be forcing our choices and kind of creating a divide between the society on these lines as well. Because I believe we are a big country.
Do you think
people
India
have different food habits. We should not be telling them this is right, this is wrong. Everything is perfectly fine.
No, but do you see India, you may say that that is the right way to go about it, and all of us would agree. But what do you... No, you would say that, no one has the right to enforce anything on anybody. Let everybody decide. Fair enough. That's how we all would love to see it. But when we look at the reality in some parts of India, how do you see that getting reinforced with even places which are proving exceptions, which may be some of the most progressive states, some of the most progressive cities, but people struggle on a daily basis? And I'm also asking this question, do the social norms get the right to enforce any form of food habits, whether it be vegetarianism or non-vegetarianism, quite frankly, terms that are very prevalent in India or similar countries largely?
Okay, I got your point. See, there is a vast change in India right now. People may say that there are people who are divided on the basis of what food habits they have. But the present generation, the so-called millennials and the new generation, they don't bother about who is eating what. I have seen when I go to my children's school also, they bring their different set of lunch boxes and they eat together. There are 10 or 20 kids sitting together and having their lunches together. They don't bother who's bringing what and who's bringing not. So what I feel is it's rather hyped controversy. Most of the society is okay with whatever food habits people have. Let's not go political about it. Let's not go any other point about it. The fact of the matter is, this is a non-controversy for me. I feel the order should not have been given from Zomato itself. It was fine. Everything was going fine. Because if I have to order, I already have the green and the red lights. I already know what I'm ordering. So why do I worry about what color t-shirt a person is wearing? That is what I ask.
Okay. All right. Pradeep, you've made your point. And I have to stress on that one line. You said most of the RWA societies don't enforce such restrictions. That's an important wording, if I may say, that you've also used. But, Lloyd Matthias, to you, with what has unfolded with Zomato, do you also see it as a changing trend in how businesses and brands are now engaging with market? For all the furore that happened, for all the things that were proposed and then rolled back in the nature and form, there was one thing that seemed to be consistent with what Deepinder kept saying. And that was his engagement with his customers in a very direct way. Of course, he got a lot of backlash for that. But do you see that established change in how businesses are engaging with their customers, or does this also lead them to be blindsided to what would be the traditional checks? How do you look at it?
Thank you, Sneha. I think it's not a policy that could lead to discrimination, especially after the decision to have separate colored fleets has been rolled back. To that extent, I think now to blame Zomato, for creating polarization, I think is quite absurd. Having said which, I think as a business, Zomato erred by not checking the decision earlier, right? When you talk of creating separate colored fleets, I think the kind of ramifications it could have, as Deepinder Goyal has now rightly admitted, about danger to his delivery boys or even to consumers who are now identified as vegetarian or otherwise. I think that is a decision that as a large business, as a listed company, I think Zomato ought to have thought through much better. That was completely unacceptable. Having said which, I think there are two factors at play. I think one, new age companies like Zomato are respecting customer choice. I know there are a lot of vegetarians who are uncomfortable getting vegetarian food out of a box that might also have a non-veg item coexisting. And that's respecting consumer choice. And to assume that that's discriminatory, I think is absurd. For the simple reason that across this country, we have restaurants that are vegetarian. Now, tomorrow to go on a rampage and say that no restaurant has the right to be 100% vegetarian, I think it's crazy. So you have to respect the fact that there are consumers who think differently. As Mr. Rawat rightly pointed out, within one household, there could be a vegetarian and non-vegetarian. I have friends who have separate kitchens because spouses think differently. And it's not just about religion and caste. Very often it's about personal choice. It's about lifestyle. It's about dietary habits. So I think giving consumers choice is a good progressive measure. I think companies looking at that aspect and working towards it is right. But creating segregations like different color, I think is certainly not advisable and certainly not a decision that a respectable company should take. But pinning it all and saying polarization is a factor of companies, I think is going overboard. And that's one point that I don't agree with my friend Sanjay Jha. I think to blame a Zomato for creating polarization in society, which already has a lot of other fissures, I think is taking things a bit too far.
All right. Okay, Sanjay Jha, the truth remains India has such a diverse food culture, and that's really India's pride. But while you raised concerns over what should have been my right to eat whatever I want to eat vis-a-vis what others are trying to impose, you had Mr. Rawat go ahead and explain about how, the kids share the tiffins, they bring different forms of food, but they share their tiffins. That would have been much of what we have grown up with. Do you see that change? And is that largely the challenge to a business which is trying to cater to different sensibilities? Because there's nothing wrong with being pure vegetarian. And when this decision was rolled out, I frankly spoke to my very young colleagues in the office. They did have the gray, they did speak about, okay, this may go anyway, but they did say that, when they order from restaurants, they don't know whether this is coming with their non-veg food, and they don't know whether this will be without any spillage. They did raise those concerns, but they understood where this could also lead to. So there are so many sensibilities in India today. And is that where really the challenge comes in? Because all of this is not isolated from politics, religion, caste, society. And it's so much more complex when it's an election season.
Sneha, you've hit the nail on the head. I don't believe we should come on your very well-respected program and, just be politically correct because that's the way to be. The truth is that can anybody make an Amar Akbar Anthony today? They won't. They can't because of the perceived backlash. I'll give you another example. Lloyd says that he doesn't agree with me, but can Lloyd disagree with me because he's a business strategist of what Tanishq was forced to do? Withdraw an ad, which talked about a syncretic culture. Will Lloyd agree on what happened with the surf ad, which was considered polarizing, where there were young children talking about being together? I mean, this is the new India that has emerged. Why are we pretending that, let's address the elephant in the room? A movie, or was it a web series called Tandav, was scrapped literally because people didn't like whatever were the connotations. You can see the new trend in Bollywood films. Every film is a nationalist film. No one dares to make characters or plots that can actually be disturbing to the powers that be in the country. So why are we just trying to, be superficial and, utter some usual boilerplate statements? I challenge anybody on your program to tell me, does Mr. Jha or Mr. Matthias know, and I want him to respond to it before the show is over, of the Swiggy customer? Since we're talking about food, let's take an example of a Swiggy customer who said, I don't want a Muslim man to deliver food to me. You and I are not living in a fool's paradise here. Let's get real. Let's not be delusional. There is a polarized India and it's reached homes, and we can't run away from that reality. And I'll tell you where I'm disappointed with Zomato. I think Zomato, in doing the red and the blue, red and the green, was probably trying to play itself as a favorite with what they believe is a perceived trend of people who favor vegetarian food. And Zomato thought, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll beat Swiggy at this game.
All right.
So it was, I don't think a company which is, listed and has a market capitalization can take such decisions, casually, right? These are well thought through. I'm sure they have a market and a consumer strategy for it. And it's unfortunate.
Okay. Subhash Jha, if I can come to you on this. Subhash Jha, to what Sanjay Jha has said, and let me just throw this question at you again, and I hope you can hear me louder this time. It's clearer. My team has fixed the audio issue. But the way India is looking at issues, the way food unites and the way food divides, has India changed in that sense? Have sensibilities changed? Now, you know what Zomato has finally done? Zomato has finally done that, fair enough, we will keep the food segregated, but it's only the customer who can see it in the app. We are doing away with the color code because we realize there are pertinent issues and challenges that we may not be able to rectify. Is that the face of a new India that we may or not agree to, Mr. Jha, Mr. Subhash Jha?
Sneha, let me tell you, your audio has still not been fixed. But what I understand, the question which has been posed to me, let me answer to that. But first, let me tell you that Mr. Jha has been a political commentator for ages now, and therefore he looks at every problem with the prism of politics, possibly. He sees politics everywhere, or religion everywhere. I mean, what is that this got to do with any religion? I know I have many Muslim friends who are absolutely vegetarian, and there is nothing wrong. We must respect the sentiments also of a large number of people who are living in this country, and to them also there is something called fundamental right. They have a right. They have a right to choice, right to food, and therefore there is absolutely nothing wrong if they are asserting the rights to have segregation of foods or making a request to any company. As a matter of business policy, if a company take recourse to corrective measures, I see absolutely nothing wrong in company adhering to that, because ultimately, assuming that it is 20%, 40 crores is our population. 120 crores, 20 crores of, 20% of that would also mean a huge number, 28 crores of population. So that means if 28 crores people of populations, their sentiments are to be respected, and if they are asserting their rights to have segregation of food, I see absolutely nothing wrong. I think we are blowing this out of its proportion. There is nothing like trying to compare everything or trying to see from the prism of politics or religion or religious sentiments. I don't see that should be the approach.
Subhash Jha, let me ask one thing to just try and understand your take on this even better. You are saying segregation with colors was fine. I mean, there is segregation without colors now. You still have a delivery fleet without segregation of colors. Is that good enough for you? Did you, I mean, what was your initial reactions when you, and with the conversations that happened around with the color-coded segregations, do you see a difference between the two of them?
See, Sneha, if I can understand, if you talk of color, green color is mostly associated with Muslims. Is it not a fact? But still, green color is also associated with greenery, with everything which is green. And if it is associated with vegan, I don't think anybody should have any problem. And it is easy to identify. Therefore, we have got segregation in a different color, even for throwing waste. You see, at many places you would find, when Mr. Jha felt offended when I referred to foreign country. I refer to foreign country only to show that this is not happening only in India. You go to any country, you go to any Islamic country. I was in a foreign country, an Islamic country, 2 weeks back. There also, the same process, it is everywhere the same. So there is segregation based on color. So segregation on the basis of color, if somebody is wearing green, green is associated with pure veg fleet. There's absolutely nothing wrong. I don't see anything wrong in this. How can this be a detrimental business policy? I see absolutely no problem.
Okay,
I don't think we should,
I think the
sitting
panel
on
is
a channel,
extremely divided
on a national
on this.
channel, should blow this out of its proportion.
No, there's one thing for sure, no one is blowing this out of proportion. I think everyone on this panel is coming with some very important perspectives. And as a moderator here, as an anchor here, I think it's very important that each of you are heard out and your points are brought in with the due diligence and respect that you all have been called in. And I think I just want to reaffirm this. To understand what's happening in India, it's important to have different versions, and it's not blowing anything out of proportion.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure, I hope Zomato is watching this, because I'm sure they will take away some important takeaways that may help them in the future. And I do hope, Deepinder Goyal, you will join us at some point. But Lloyd Matthias, yes, you want to come in. What do you want to share at this point? You were raising your hand.
Just a small point. I think I totally agree that consumers' choice is paramount. As a free society, brands, businesses must cater to consumer choice. I also take the point that Sanjay made, that when companies do advertising that's meant to be synchronistic and sometimes society rejects it badly, that's par for the course. There are people who are going to be outliers. Just like he mentioned the example of a Swiggy customer that was unhappy with somebody from a particular faith delivering his goods. I mean, those are exceptions. That is not the norm. Indian society, by and large, is fairly inclusive. But blaming corporations for providing consumer choice and saying that this further accentuates polarization, I think is completely absurd, right? Companies will need to look at all consumer segments. Companies will need to make choices. Specifically, though, on the Zomato case, to identify riders with specific colors, I think that was going overboard. But to have a segregated fleet, to have people who are delivering food only in a vegetarian box, I think is completely acceptable, because we have to respect the fact that people's dietary habits may just make them feel uncomfortable being served vegetarian food from the same container. It's like having the same restaurant kitchen that has the same frying pan using for both items, saying that no, but I've served you vegetarian. People do feel uncomfortable. And respecting consumer choice is what businesses and brands must do. And we are not here to make political statements about polarization or otherwise. And I think that's something that's completely unfair, and pinning it on a company is just not on.
Right, important point there. Sanjay Jha, if I can come to you before I go over to Pradeep Rawat. Sanjay Jha, very quick response to what Lloyd Matthias has said. It was a problem that was identified. There were efforts to find a solution to that. Eventually, they found a solution that they think would work the best with their customers. Was the route to that final solution possibly the way they took it that became the challenge, that became the not best way to go about it? Or are you having a problem with the problem that they identified? Because, I mean, if you are a pure vegetarian, for whatever choice you have, and if you want to have it without spillage, that's a problem. Yeah. Now, being a delivery partner, if you're trying to find a solution to that, I think it's the best way to find it without offending sensibilities without creating threat environments, and that's possibly what Zomato eventually is looking into? Or do you see this totally wrong?
Sneha, I think
A
you are
minute to you,
holding
Sanjay
this
Jha, before I go to
program.
Pradeep.
You're holding this program very responsibly. I want to tell both Subhash Jha as well as Lloyd, the very fact that Zomato has withdrawn the color distinctions of green and red is proof of the fact that Zomato realized that this was not appropriate. I don't have to say it, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Jha and Lloyd must understand Zomato has withdrawn it. Why? Because there was a public outrage. Why was there a public outrage? Because people felt that this was not right. And I'll tell you the reason why it is not right. You make delivery boys in this country, people who are doing that very hard job, which is, by the way, their livelihood and income, vulnerable for abuse, for who knows, for even some degree of threat or violence, saying, what are you doing
All
here?
right.
You might actually
So,
endanger
Sanjay, from
some
what I
telling.
make out, you don't have a problem with the problem that was identified. You do think the problem was genuine. And they have eventually
Absolutely.
tried to come to a solution that they think would work best with the customers who want food, possibly that's not along with non-veg food, but the route that they took initially is problematic and blindsided according to you. That's what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah, Sneha, the very fact that Zomato has withdrawn it vindicates the stance that you have taken, and I'm glad I have buttressed your argument. Because ultimately, as they say, better late than never. But Zomato has shown that they could be reasonable when they got a public, kind of a backlash.
Okay.
A small point, Sneha, if I may.
Okay, Pradeep Rawat to you. Okay, go ahead. 30 seconds before I go to Pradeep Rawat. Go ahead, please.
Sanjay's point, I think to recognize that Zomato has withdrawn it, they have withdrawn the color segregation. They still will maintain separate vegetarian and non-vegetarian fleets with no color segregation.
Absolutely.
Withdrawal is not always a sign of capitulation. Both the examples that Sanjay mentioned earlier, both the ad from Surf as well as from Tanishq, the ads were withdrawn. Not because they were bad ads, but because there was a lot of furor. And today a lot of furor can also be engineered. It's not always, and businesses will protect themselves and withdraw ads just to protect their teams. In both Surf and in the case of Tanishq, the ads were withdrawn, Sanjay. And that was not because the companies thought about what they wanted to do. They had no choice.
Yeah, it was a fanatical overreaction, Lloyd. Don't try and... Are you trying to justify the
and both of this will go into a very different tangent. I have to go to Pradeep Rawat to be able to hold this thought. Sanjay as well as Lloyd, I will have to request both of you at this point not to get into that topic because we'll go into a totally different tangent. Pradeep Rawat, I want to bring two aspects to you, two conversations that I had. One, with a colleague who spoke about how this colleague would love to get some vegetarian food that would make him comfortable because even if they're ordering from a non-vegetarian food, restaurant, they don't know if it's being cooked along with the other stuff. They close a blind eye because they want to eat that food and whatever reasons. There's the other side to it, Pradeep Rawat, and that is a colleague was talking to me about a resident in this colleague's complex. This colleague wanted to order some raw meat, and this woman, the delivery boy, did not make the entry into this person's restaurant. I wish I had this person with me. There are so many others as well. Did not make the entry into that residence association with this woman's name, but instead with my colleague's name, who's a man, because this woman did not want to be identified as somebody who had ordered that product in the residence. So two very different instances, and this is a challenge, but the way residents in some areas, the residents as well as welfare associations react, possibly make the choice to be able to eat what they eat very, very difficult in India today.
Shreya, I totally agree with this fact that ultimately, no matter what we say, it's the choice of the person who is deciding what I want to eat, and I should be able to decide without anybody telling me what I can and what I cannot. Secondly, as you mentioned, that there's a colleague in the office who says, I am okay with the segregation. But I tell you very frankly, I do eat out a lot because I have colleagues, I have a big team of people working with me.
Can they be held to account? Can RWAs be held to account?
Okay. See, actually, Okay, I got your point. What I'm trying to say is, ultimately, RWAs are not the wholesale lawmakers. They work under the law of the country and the law of the land. If the law of the land says that yes, every person is free to decide what he or she wants to eat, who is RWA to tell anybody that you cannot eat this, you cannot eat that? Yes, there are a few exceptions, as previously mentioned also. It may happen in some remote corner of, maybe I heard somewhere in Mumbai or somewhere, but otherwise, all in all RWAs, all people who are working in RWAs, they are okay with the fact, because even the 9 or 10 people who are working in RWA, not all are vegetarians or non-vegetarians. They all are divided in, whatever they want to have. So let's not make this too much complicated. As a citizen, I'm saying, everything can be controlled, everything cannot be controlled. What we got to do is let people decide what they want to eat, and let not force our thoughts on somebody else's. Like I gave an example of people eating together. When we go to a party, when we go to a function, when we go to a dinner gathering, we don't tell somebody that you are non-vegetarian, don't come and sit at my table. It's our own duty that we decide that we will not be allowing our plates to touch his plates, or he will not touch our plates or our stuff. But ultimately, it's the choice of the citizen. It should be left to him that what he wants to eat. Yeah, that is what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Well, between the red and the green, not everything is black and white. And that's where Sanjay Jha, Subhash Jha, Pradeep Rawat, as well as Lloyd Matthias, thank you very much for joining us, having a very civil conversation, debating things out. You all may not see each other eye to eye, but you brought in some very important perspectives from India. Respect for that. Thank you very much, all four of you, for joining us on this very sensitive topic. It's time for a short break. On the other side, do join us for all the latest.